Okay, unfortunately I need to use a microphone because I'm losing my voice this week. I'm so sorry. I've obviously done too many presentations, so I'm just excited to be in Harrison. I don't know. Um, my name is Paul Edmonds. I am Red Dragon Consultant. I'm the principal of Red Dragon. It's not only myself in Red Dragon. We have about 5 or 8 subcontractors depending which projects we do. I thought I'd give you a little bit about my background. Um, I came into British Columbia 8.5 years ago from a 25-year career in the UK for federal emergency management equivalents. In the UK, I was well, I've been many things, officer, enforcement officer, military and police liaison, as well as dealing with some major emergencies, to slope stability, to involving the big, bad and nasties of this world, being deployed overseas for certain things. And in the last 8 years, I started working for the regional district Okanagan-Similkameen. I come down from Penticton yesterday. And I became their emergency manager for the 2018 floods, landslides and wildfires. Obviously, is a whole different world for me, being in Canada. Because of my background and the variety of things I've done, I'm like a certified incident commander, amongst other things. I went to the province to help them with Grand Forks for the floods in 2018. I was stationed down there for around about 9 months, dealing with, as a provincial liaison person to parliamentary secretaries and assistant deputy ministers going through the flood recovery process. And then I went on to write the response plan for Grand Forks and Regional District Kootenay Boundary, which I'll be very honest, that sort of launched my consulting career. I wasn't thinking of being a contractor. Ever since then, I work for the province in some regards for emergency management, climate readiness, and other departments, Ministry of Environment and others. I'm also certified under Public Safety Canada for certain other types of projects. So my company, we write emergency plans, we do training, we do a lot of reviews. Some of the reviews that we've done recently, I don't know how many reviews we've done in total, I should have that off the top of my head. The McDougall Creek fire in Kelowna, for instance, we're involved with that. The Bush Creek East fire in Salmon Arms, the Chilcotin River landslide, as well as going back to atmospheric river flooding as well. So we do gather a lot of learning along. And with that said, with the evacuation planning is one of those areas that we've been starting to specialize in. We're around about 50 different plans at the moment in different communities, ranging from Lower Mainland to yourselves, so high density urban environments, right up into northern BC for rural First Nations. So it's quite a variety of things that we do just from evacuation planning. I suppose unfortunately, but also there's an opportunity, what I'm about to say is our plans have been tested for the White Rock Lake fire, for some of the other wildfires in Slocan Valley in northern BC. Our evacuation plans and Bush Creek East fire, we've actually tested our evacuations plans with local governments and the community because they were going through this process. Not that I ever want you to test this plan. So it's built on tested knowledge. So we keep on refining it as we go through it. And there's maybe 8 or 9 slides I'm going to share with you. The last sort of 3 months, we have gone to look at your community and we've looked at different areas within the community that could have an evacuation and then use that to create planning guidance because we don't know where the event is going to be. So all what we've produced is to provide guidance for the village that in the case of, if something happens. So I'm going to walk you through that little bit of a process to give you a little bit more awareness. I should press this slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project and what we've done. I'm going to sort of go through sort of 6 questions, and I'm going to come back to those at the end because they're my interest to know where your concerns are. I'm not expecting anybody to shout out your questions and we answer it through the microphone. I'd love if you can come over to that table and actually talk to me. We can have a conversation so I can make notes. because I'm not going to be able to remember everything. I'm going to give a bit of a guide about the evacuation processes. I'm going to talk about evacuation routes, of how the plan comes together and the funding. The route is sort of it's a strange word to have in evacuation route planning, because it comes from the province is funding this through a grant process to the village. I'm not there to build roads. I'm there to look at the best ways to evacuate a community. There are obviously recommendations that fall from that as well. I'm going to give an idea of the zones that we looked at and why we did that. I'm going to explain, it's only one slide for model estimations. We look at traffic modeling, we look at census information, we look at the number of hotels you got. So it was quite an in-depth process to try to understand how many people would need to be evacuated. And then we put a plus or minus 20% on that as well, because we don't know on that day how many people are going to be in the village. And then I'm going to put up the slide about engagement, which is the questions I'd love for you to answer, or if you have any other concerns, just come and chat to me. Are we all in the right place? Yeah. Can we turn the lights? There's no movie about to start. I'm really sorry. Is that better? Oh. So just giving you a bit of an overview of the project, of where it came from. The village was successful in applying for a grant under the Union of BC Municipalities. There's a whole program under the province at the moment, and for the last so many years, of preparedness for municipalities, regional districts, and for First Nations to go through their emergency plans, evacuation plans, training for fire departments, looking at flood mitigation, and a whole raft of things that the local governments can actually apply for. So the village was successful in applying for and receiving an evacuation route planning grant, which is where I came in. I was contracted by the village to come in and support that work. So in what we've done, in our process, we do a desk review. So we do research, we pull down reports from the flood reports, from Mount Breckenridge to your wildfire hazards. We go through everything, as well as what's in the community that we can find. And then we come on to site and actually look at the community. So from my days as an officer, the best value you can have in writing a plan is actually to stand on the ground, to actually understand what people would have to face in the decisions they face if an event happens. So I actually came down and had a look around the village and had some ideas about what would happen if I was the Emergency Operations Center director. How would I manage in an ideal scenario, or worst case scenario, depending on how you want to look at it, how would I look at evacuating the village? Depending on the event, and I have to give so many disclaimers because we don't know what the event is going to be, but we try to cater for everything. There's a good possibility to do a phased evacuation within the village, which is why you can see different colors, different zones. And I would say from all the evacuations that we've been involved with and what's happened in the real world, interior wildfires and floods and atmospheric river, we don't know the size of the evacuation alert or order. But these are planning zones to help guide the village of, do we know everything within this area? And how would we evacuate everybody within, I'm going to pick on the sort of pinky purple zone at the bottom. So our guidance document helps the village plan ahead if we have time. And I'll talk about the different types of evacuations. So we do that on-site assessment. We map all the zones. We take pictures. We try to make sure it's as future-proof as possible. And when we look at some of the population, and you have a fluctuating population, as you very well know, we tend to try and look at how would we plan to do this if an event happened in January or happened in August. So we tried to look at the differences and put that extra 20% on the models to understand what's the impact to the number of people evacuating, impact to the roads as well. So we have some science behind it. And then we create the evacuation tools or toolkits, as I call them. They're the guidance documents to help the Emergency Operations Center. So the what ifs of the world, as I was mentioning. And we do some training alongside that of the process of evacuations as well from a local government perspective. So these are the questions I'm going to come back to at the end. So just to give you sort of an idea, I'm sure you all have issues in your head you'd like to ask me about. I've already had some really good questions. So I'm more than happy to listen to any concerns you have. Don't be sort of limited to what I've got on up there, but it can be known and potential hazards in the community, the evacuation routes, what are the alternatives, if I can say it tonight, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Previous events or any issues experienced, you know, communication black spots. You are pretty good in the village because that's one of our tests as well, to look for communication black spots. Any pinch points, route hazards, things like this. And just using just what I just said then, we pull down the ICBC crash data as well, the collision data, to know which intersections have the most collisions. So we've looked at that within the village as well to understand, is it Pine Avenue, Emerald Avenue, McPherson? Where are the pinch points from when we're doing the planning? So we're at the draft stage now, which is why I'm talking to you. So any concerns, please come and see them at the end. Any vulnerable population you'd like to make sure we're aware of, any infrastructure, and your level of preparedness. So just so that we're on a level playing field, there are different types of evacuations. We have the tactical evacuations. So this is, if you don't mind me using the fire department as the example, the fire chief would come along and say, you have to leave now. There's actually an authority under the Fire Service Act for that person of authority to evacuate you tactically. RCMP, Ministry of Environment have got those powers, BC Wildfire. On the other side of my slide, you'll see evacuation alert, evacuation order, and evacuation rescind. This is where the village comes in, or the local government, or the First Nation, for instance. These are what's called strategic evacuations, so these are planned. This is not if there's and I'm going to use the example, touch wood, if there's any wood here. I hope this doesn't happen, but a structure fire, that's a tactical event. You have blue lights responding, you have qualified, certified commanders there. When it comes to a larger event, the Emergency Operations Center looks at the decisions, the hazards, and they plan if there needs to be an evacuation. And they roll through an alert, which is notification only. This is your warning to be ready, to be prepared. You may be required to leave. An evacuation order is when you must leave. To put an evacuation order in place, you have to have a state of local emergency. So the village is then enacting its emergency. So you have to have the state of local emergency because it's infringement of human rights. You're asking people to leave their homes, for instance. And then we have the, support under the evacuation order for anybody that is displaced from their primary residence. And there's emergency support services enabling you to have the support you require. And we have some, well, I've lost the people, some wonderful people from emergency support services here today for you to chat about. At the very end of that, and the hazard is gone away, and I'm sort of looking at it very simply, there's a rescind or all clear, and people go home. It's a managed process of looking at requesting people to leave their homes, putting in place traffic control, putting in place security, and actually managing the event to support whoever is at the incident site. We do have another one in the mix. Not wishing to confuse you, we have a shelter in place. So sometimes there is an event, it could be the fire chief, it could be somebody else that says it's better to stay indoors and stay where you are. So that's a shelter in place. A semi-colliding and is carrying dangerous chemicals, for instance, could be something that's used for shelter in place. You don't necessarily going to have that in the village, but you don't know, do you? So there are different levels of evacuation, but the ones to remember tonight is tactical is done by responders. So that's usually the people with blue lights and uniforms. And then the village, local governments would look at undertaking an evacuation alert and possibly into an evacuation order. And then obviously the resend all clear. So our plans are built around sort of the alert stage. So when I showed you that map, and it's going to come back up again, when we're looking at those planning zones, they are not the alerts, they are not the orders, they're the planning that if something did happen in the area, these are the considerations that the village needs to look after people, the community, the environment, and infrastructure. I don't think you're going to read all that because I can just read that. It goes through the same thing I just explained, but in a slightly different way. You have the evacuation decision at the top, that light blue, where you have the threat, the hazard itself, whether it's a wildfire or any other event. You need to understand it, and you need to decide, is it going to be an evacuation or not? Then you go into, from a strategic evacuation perspective, you're going to look at an alert, which you would have to issue an alert. The village would issue it through Voyant Alert. Alertable, got it wrong. That's the second time I had that wrong today. Alertable, so you will receive that alert that you have to be aware of something within your community. You may need to evacuate. Now's the time, if you haven't already, to be prepared. And you could have a shelter in place at the same time as well. Then it goes into an order, and that requires the state of local emergency to put in place, and an order would come through Alertable to make sure that this is what's going to happen. You're asked to leave your house, your property, and they go through the traffic control points and everything else. When it comes to an evacuation order, obviously the safety of people is paramount. And emergency support services are there to support people who've been displaced because of an emergency. But you could also go to family or friends. You may need to go to the reception center. Many things for registrations now online. I am not going to steal ESS's thunder because they know more about that side of it than I do, to be perfectly honest. You may have specialist facilities, all there to support people. You can have livestock movement under alerts and orders to support livestock producers, for instance. And then we have the resend, the all clear. When we look at the evacuation planning, there's a number of factors that we take into account. How prepared are people within the community? What is the population? This is not simply the number of houses you have or the number of doors you have. How many visitors do you have into the community? So the village, Hot Springs, has a fluctuating population. So we've included a range in our modeling to try and understand what happens in January, what happens in August, for instance, to give some idea of how many vehicles would we have on this road, and can the highway cope with it, for instance. The type of the event, and like I said before, we look at all the different hazards ranging from floods. Wildfire obviously is also there, but we look at heat, cold, Mount Breckenridge, as I mentioned earlier as well. We tend to look at all the hazards to try and create a plan that covers all eventualities to help plan an evacuation. The timing of the evacuation, the notice period, so is it a tactical evacuation with no notice, or is it a planned, phased approach to evacuations? The type of evacuation, the evacuation route, the distance to safety. And we've looked at, with the models, we've included a 60-minute destination. That's all we're looking at when we look at the models. In 1 hour's time, you will be safe. I'm not saying but construction on Highway 1, for instance, and how long that will take. But how long will it actually take you to get somewhere safe? So 60 minutes is our guide to making sure that you've got somewhere Chilliwack, for instance. And the resilience of the community, the infrastructure, the availability of emergency services, the infrastructure, water, sewer, and everything else. When we look at a community, we do a bit of a scorecard, looking at where your vulnerabilities are. So closer to 1 is more vulnerable than being at 5, for instance. So you can see there that over on my left, you have good communications. There's fire protection and the responder availability are all relatively good. They're all 4s out of 5s. When we come across to services and amenity, you can see that drops back into the spider's web. You have less services within the village, so that would drop by that. Your community resilience is, from what we hear, is good. Your demographic is a range of day visitors to seniors, so that's why it's in that sort of 3 mark. Your hazard exposure, and it's got to be said that most of your hazards will be coming from the north to the south if you looked at probability. So, you know, your wildfires, slope stability, flooding, for instance, would come from that lake area. So your main evacuation is to go south, away from the hazard. Keeps on cutting out, I think. And evacuation routes, it's scored around about a 3. You have a maintained highway. You only have 1 highway. There's no getting away from the obvious. But it is a maintained highway by Ministry of Transportation and Transit. You haven't got that far to go to the next intersection with it, where is the choice. So from that perspective, from all the other evacuation plans we do, it's an average. And obviously, the more evacuation routes you have in the community, the better it would be. But I would give you the example of the atmospheric rivers for, I'll use Princeton. They had 3 highways, Highway 3 north and south, and Highway 5, for instance, and all were compromised for different events. Not just the floods, not just landslide, but road traffic collisions as well. So it's hard to plan to make sure that you're the most resilient possible. So we look at what you have at the moment, which is Highway 7, and then the intersections to 9. You do have a lake, which has got really good facilities if there had to be a float plane evacuation, for instance, or bringing supplies in. So we look at all the eventualities of what could happen and how you could manage it. Sort of stole my thunder, not knowing what the next slide was, but Highway 9 that comes through Harrison Lake, it starts in Harrison Hot Springs, and it goes out and meets an intersection so many kilometers away, not very far. We're talking 10 minutes to Agassiz, for instance. And like I mentioned about the water infrastructure as well. So when we look at all the different zones, I know that slide looks extremely busy. That's for all the zones if we've done them, if they're all interdependent and dependent on each other. So that's all the traffic control points that we've planned, all the points of infrastructure. The red lines and green lines show the major roads that would be directed by the village for you to use, for instance. That's all the traffic control points that we planned. We wouldn't expect to see all those in place for an evacuation. We look at those different zones. So if there's the ability to do a phased evacuation, and obviously we've got other communities further north to us as well, so it requires liaison with the District of Kent. Every one of those zones has those traffic control points so they can act independent of each other. So it's a mix and match of the zones depending on the hazard. So if there's an event happening in the center orange, sort of salmon pink sort of zone, I think that's actually zone 4, which I've called it. That zone can be made safe if there's an event there. Obviously, you could add the zones on the blue zone, the orange zone, and the yellow zone and the green zone all together, for instance. We don't know where the event is going to be. Is it Maria Slough, for instance? Is that affecting so many of the planning zones? So your evacuation alert may not look nothing like this. But this helps the village understand what they need to do within those zones if they had to evacuate that area. And then that shows all the data that we looked at from assembly points, traffic control points, water infrastructure, and other items on that map. You know your community far better than I do. You live in your community, but you know the constraints on your community. We do a lot of work in northern BC, a lot of isolated rural communities in the Kootenays and elsewhere in Canada, and sending the public across Forest Service roads requires management. If you don't travel Forest Service roads on a daily basis, it leads to potential rescues, and I'm saying it as blunt as I can. There is no viable routes from your village across the mountain because of the landscape. The whole grant is there to help understand what is available and to provide recommendations, obviously, but how would we manage an evacuation? So we do look at what is available. I've had some really good comments about the availability of roads and the potential for roads, which is a bigger conversation than this evening. But we do our due diligence at looking at what are the routes there. In fact, I drove out onto some of these and to see how far I could actually get. It's one of the perks of my job, to go exploring. So we do look at that. In some cases, and this unfortunately is not the case for yourselves, we do highlight Forest Service roads as alternative routes. We've just been up in the Caribou, for instance, following the incidents up there. And some Forest Service roads have the ability to be an alternative route. But they have to manage that route. They have to go and assess that route. They have to signpost that route because people get lost up that road if you don't travel it every day. If you work in forestry, you will know those roads. But many people don't in an evacuation. So we go through our due diligence to find out what is available. So we look at it from what would happen if there was an evacuation. Like I said, we got numerous zones that we've looked at, 8 zones. 6 zones have got properties within it. 7 zones is your East Sector woodlands. So zone 7 is East Sector woodlands, and zone 8 is Mount Agassiz or Campbell Lake, depending which way you want to tell me what it's called. We do that for completeness to make sure if an event did happen, that the village have got all the guidance necessarily. And don't get me wrong, your village staff are very, very knowledgeable of what's in the village. But if there are hikers within these areas, we have to think about additional people within those other zones. So we look at it as a phased approach to try and make sure it's managed, phased, and communicated clearly. So if you had to evacuate from north to south, obviously the District of Kent has properties along the lake as well, so that needs to be taken into account, which we've referenced within the plan, that you could work through those zones and tell people you have to leave, depending on the event. So we're given the plan to help people manage this event. On that slide where I said there's all these traffic control points, we wouldn't have that many because there will be some strategic evacuation traffic control points put in place, and then you basically withdraw from the village. So that's the sort of information that we put in our plans to help staff to understand that. We looked at the 2021 census. We've looked at your housing counts, your civic addresses. We have access to, where we brought data down from the Fraser Valley Regional District. We have access into 911 as well. We have access to BC assessment for all the different types of properties within there. So and obviously you have numerous park sites as well. So we've catered for the number of park sites at the same time as civic addresses. So when I show you the next slide or two, we've tried to sort of, what happens if there is 100 park sites, for instance, this is just a number off the top of my head, and you have to go door knocking. What's the resources required? Or do the site have to have has the site, sorry, got an evacuation plan and they know exactly what to do? So it's good. Everybody is prepared. So we cater for both scenarios. That's how we've numbered the zones. There's no hierarchical order in those zones. They are interdependent on each other. But as you go south, you will realize, because you know your community, for zones 5 and 6, they become interdependent on allowing access from other zones. So we include that within our documents as well, because you couldn't have an evacuation order for 5 and 6 because it stops everybody driving up the road. You'd have to have a permit system to get through, depending on the hazard. So we try to make them independent and interdependent of each other, that's too many dependents, depending on the hazard to experience. Those zones then are broken down into door knocking areas. So this is where you actually see people come to your door to tell you there's an evacuation order. So this is usually the fire department. It could be public works. It could be staff. But it's usually search and rescue. Kent Harrison, search and rescue, thank you. They would be coming around. They would be tasked to come and support. And they are very well practiced in how they would come around and do the door knocking through. They would liaise with the Emergency Operations Center for door knocking to make sure everybody's safe. And they record who's at those properties. So when we do our modeling and civic addresses and the number of is there 30 units in this strata, we include that within our planning documents. So village staff have got that available to them to make sure search and rescue, I'll use search and rescue as an example, are aware it's not just 100 civic address points, it's 100 plus another 100 potential park homes they may need to go and door knock. So we try to cater. This is it me or is this cutting out? Okay. So there's some big sort of different numbers on that slide. So your population census, 1,950, but we've estimated there could be another 3,500 people staying in the village, depending on the time of year, depending where, from parks to hotels to Airbnbs. So we've worked with Tourism Harrison as well to understand what are the other populations that come through the village. We then look at the number of homes and the park units, as well as the hotels and the Airbnbs, like I said. And what's the number of vehicles likely to evacuate? It's all models, it's all estimations. Time to evacuate, and this is for a strategic evacuation. This is not the fire department tapping your door to say, get out. This is for a planned evacuation. There's something happening that you need to leave the area. So that 11 to 16 hours is the range of the population that's in the village at the time. From the time the phone call comes in to staff being organized, to the physical the door knocking, to the physical evacuation, plus another 2 hours. The province has, for evacuation planning, they stipulate an additional 2 hours for people to be prepared. So we add that into our models. In a real world scenario, and I've stood on the real world scenario, I'll use White Rock Lake fire, for instance. Time to evacuate, we thought it could be around about 10 hours. In real terms, that was 5-6 hours, because there'll be 20% of people leaving before they receive the door knock to say leave, been told to leave. So we try to take that into account. These are worst case scenarios. I always remember a few years ago, a gentleman said, oh, it doesn't take me, and I can use your exact 10 minutes to drive to Agassiz, I can do it in 7. So in a real world scenario, we don't know what the road conditions can be like, so we do worst case scenarios. But it helps when you plan in understanding how many resources do I need and how long have we got to move people. Our plans was used in the Bush Creek East fire for evacuations for the fire at Salmon Arms because it helped BC Wildfire understand how long would it take this community to evacuate down a single road, Anglemont, Scotch Creek, Lee Creek, for instance. How long would it take people? What's the number of cars that we're expecting on this road? Is it 11 hours? Is it 10 hours? We have 4 hours, which means that we're under-resourced. So it helps the responders understand we need to do something a little bit different. It's not just 2 people on a road. So you pull in the resources to assist you to make sure people are safe. If you haven't already, please sign up for Alertable, and I think Christy's going to be talking about Alertable at the tables. Make a plan at the evacuation alert stage. I've wrote many over my lifetime in my career. I've also been evacuated myself for the Christie Mountain Fire, which was a real interesting concept for somebody that has evacuated thousands of people over 31 years. To be evacuated through an evacuation order to see the process from the other side. So I would say make a plan so you know where you're going. Are you going to friends and family in Chilliwack, for instance? Have you got a business? Are you prepared? You know, business continuity. Do you understand what would happen if? And know your route and know your meeting place. So, and I know the Emergency Preparedness Guide has that further information in there. So our evacuation plans complement what you have already. So I'm going to leave that up there. That's the end of my presentation. I think I'll hand it back over to Christy now. But I'm going to be standing here. Please come and hear about any of your concerns. More than happy to try and answer your questions and alleviate some of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think I'll just open it up now and we'll have our ESS volunteers back over there. Myself and Kaylee will be sort of near the Alertable and FireSmart resources if anyone has any questions. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but we do have some copies of our evacuation planning survey paper copies here. Otherwise, we'll keep that one up on our Get Into It Harrison page for a few more days, just trying to really gauge some of that community preparedness information to utilize, and Paul will be taking detailed notes. If you walk away tonight and you have any other questions or concerns, please just feel free to reach out, send an email to the info@harrisonhotsprings.ca or come by the village office and we'll do our best to get back to you whenever we can.